I've read meters for the County Water Authority for 6 years. You get a route, a handheld scanner, and a list of addresses. Most days it's driveways and dogs and old folks who want to talk. The meters sit in little pits under a metal lid, a glass dial you wipe clean with your thumb before you read it. I could do the whole route half asleep. The first time something didn't add up, it was just a number. 1 meter out on Cedar Loop had logged 4,000 gallons in a week. Nobody had lived in that house since spring. I want to be clear about how boring this job is, because that's the part that matters. You drive a little white truck, you wear a vest so people's dogs know you're coming. You kneel down a couple hundred times a day, hook the lid with a tool that looks like a bent screwdriver, lift it, and read a set of black numbers behind fogged glass. Then you log it and you move on. The whole appeal is that nothing happens. You get used to nothing happening. After 6 years, I could tell you which houses had a slow drip, which ones ran their sprinklers against the rules, which old man would be waiting at his mailbox wanting to talk about the weather. I knew my route the way you know your own kitchen in the dark. So, Cedar Loop stuck. The Harmons had moved out in April. I read that meter empty for 4 months. The same 5 digits every time, because the water to the house had been capped at the main. I'd watched the county do it myself. A guy named Ruiz shut it off at the street, packed the valve, marked it out of service on the sheet. And here was my scanner telling me 4,000 gallons had gone through a pipe that was supposed to be plugged. There had to be a simple explanation. There always was. A meter finally giving out and spinning on its own. Old equipment does strange things. I'd seen dials fog over, seen numbers stick, seen ants build a whole city inside a pit. I logged it as a suspected fault, and I drove home, and I ate dinner, and I told myself the meter was shot. That worked, right up until I started wondering how a shot meter counts 4,000 gallons and not 4 million, or nothing at all. A broken thing breaks. It doesn't keep careful time, which left the one thing I couldn't set down. If the meter was right, then water had moved through a capped pipe, the right amount, the right direction, into a house where no tap had turned in half a year. I went back on my own the next morning, before my route, because I couldn't help it. The Harmon place looked the way empty houses look. Blinds down, a phone book on the porch swelling up with weather, grass gone tall and brown in the August heat. I found the pit by the curb and lifted the lid, and the dial was moving. Not fast. The slow, patient creep of water going somewhere. The sweep hand ticking around like a clock that keeps good time. I told myself it was runoff, a neighbor's line crossing under the easement, a sprinkler on a timer next door pushing pressure back through a shared tap. It made sense when I said it out loud. So I said it out loud, standing there in that empty yard. Then I looked around. The nearest house was a good 200 feet off and had no sprinklers, just the same brown grass as everybody else. The Harmon lawn was brown too, bone dry. Whatever water was running through that meter, none of it was reaching the surface. It was all going down. I put my ear near the pit, the way you do when you're chasing a leak, and I heard it. Water, running steady somewhere under the concrete, moving with purpose, going somewhere. In a house with a dead main and a packed valve, there shouldn't have been a single drop turning over. There was a whole quiet river of it, down there in the dark, and it was headed away from the house, not toward it. I checked the cap at the street. Ruiz's mark was still on it, the valve still packed, exactly as shut off as the day I watched him cap it. I knelt back over the pit and put my hand flat on the dirt beside it. I don't know why. The ground was cool, cooler than it had any right to be in that heat, and damp, a soft give to it, like the earth a foot down had never dried out at all. I logged the read again, higher than the day before. I told myself I'd bring it to Dale and let him sort it, and that thought actually calmed me down, because Dale had been doing this longer than anyone, and Dale had seen everything. I keep coming back to that, how badly I wanted someone above me to make it small. What I couldn't shake was the ground, cool and damp a foot down, in the worst heat of the year, over a pipe that was supposed to be dead. The route sheets print out every Monday. Address, meter number, last reading, a little map thumbnail in the corner so you know where you're headed. 6 years. Same printer, same coffee stain on the paper tray. I don't read them so much as glance at them. That Monday there was a route on the bottom of my stack I didn't recognize. 11 addresses. Meter numbers I'd never logged in my life. And a name printed where the road usually goes. Ferris Hollow. Where the map thumbnail should have been, the little box was just gray, blank, like the printer had run dry on that one square of ink and nothing else on the page. I typed Ferris Hollow into my phone. Not a wrong result, not a near match, nothing. I zoomed the county map all the way in on the land out past the reservoir, where the sheet put it, and there was only green. Woods and a creek and no roads at all. Some annex subdivision from the 70s, I figured. An old paper route that got scanned back into the system by accident, sitting on a stretch of map nobody ever digitized. Records are a mess. It happens. I almost set it aside, and then I noticed the part that didn't fit. The meter numbers on that sheet weren't blank placeholders. They were real numbers. 11 of them, each with a last reading logged in clean handwriting the system had scanned in. Somebody had been reading Ferris Hollow recently, which meant it wasn't a ghost on the page. It was a place, and it had meters, and now it was mine. I took both to Dale that afternoon, the Cedar Loop red and the route with no map. Dale runs the field crew out of a cinder block office that smells like burnt coffee and toner, and he has been doing it long enough that nothing lands on him anymore. He looked at Cedar Loop first. He shrugged. Old lines, he said. You get used to it. He told me a capped main weeps back through a bad seal sometimes, and the meter counts the seepage. He said the word ghost read like it was a normal word, like they had a form for it, and it turned out they did. He filled it out in about 30 seconds. Then I showed him Ferris Hollow. Something moved across his face, just for a second, and then it was gone and he was bored again. That one's decommissioned, he said. Whole line got abandoned when the well field failed. County keeps it on the books for the taxes. Reads garbage. Don't lose sleep over it. He told me to log the 11 as false and move on. Let me know if it keeps happening, he said, already turning back to his screen. It kept happening. But that afternoon, walking out to my truck, it made sense the way he'd said it. Bad seal. Dead line. Garbage reads. By the time I hit my own driveway that night, I mostly believed him. And believing him felt like setting something heavy down. Except I kept snagging on one thing he'd said and one thing he hadn't. He'd said the well field failed and the line was abandoned. He had not said one word about who'd been logging clean monthly reads on 11 dead meters in a town that isn't on any map. He'd looked at that sheet and he'd known the name before he read it, and he'd changed the subject. I didn't know it yet, but the way Dale wouldn't say who logged those reads was the thing that mattered. It was the first real warning, and I let a man wave it off in 30 seconds, because the answer was easier to carry than the question. I want to say I let it go. I'd have been lying. I drove out on a Saturday, on my own time, because a thing Dale wouldn't explain had gotten bigger in my head than a thing Dale explained away. The turnoff wasn't on the map, but it was there, right where the sheet said, a gravel road peeling off the county blacktop between two power poles. No sign. Grass grew up the center hump the way it does on a road nobody drives. The trees closed in, then opened, and there was Ferris Hollow, sitting in a shallow bowl of land like water had pooled there once and dried. It was a real town, maybe 24 houses on 3 short streets, all built in the same tired style, gray siding, sagging porches. A water tower stood at the far end on rusted legs, a church with no cross, mailboxes, curtains in some of the windows, no cars, not one, in any driveway, on any street. No power lines to the houses either, now that I looked. The poles carried the line in from the turnoff and then just stopped, like the town had been cut off from the grid a long time ago and never told. But every lawn was green. In the middle of the driest August in years, every yard in Ferris Hollow was green and even and soft. And when I stepped out of the truck, the ground pressed water up around my boots. I made myself find the ordinary version. Absentee owners. A caretaker running sprinklers, keeping the place up for families that came back at the holidays. People do stranger things with money than water in empty town. I had 11 meters to read. I decided to just work. The first pit sat in front of a house with a blue door. I lifted the lid and the dial was turning. Slow, steady. I walked to the next house and the next, lifting every lid on the street, and every single dial was moving. A whole town of meters counting up at once. And not one car, not one light, not one person to run a single tap. I told myself there was a break in the main, a busted line downhill pulling water through the whole grid and out into the dirt. That reads as usage on every meter. It's a real thing. It happens. Before I found the valve, I did something I shouldn't have. I looked in a window. The house with the blue door had a front curtain half open, and I cupped my hands to the glass out of plain habit. There was a kitchen table inside, a chair pushed back from it, the way you push back when you stand up mid-meal, and on the table, a single glass of water, full to the brim, sweating cold beads down its side and wringing the wood. Caretaker, I told myself. Somebody keeps the place staged. But a glass of water doesn't sweat unless it's colder than the room, and it doesn't stay full in a house nobody visits. And there was no power to that kitchen, no fridge humming, no ice anywhere in that dry, hot town. The only cold water in the whole place was sitting in a glass on a table behind a locked door, fresh, full, and the chair pushed back, like whoever poured it had just stepped out of the room. I backed away from the window. I didn't look in any of the others. Then I walked to the base of the tower and found the master valve, the wheel that kills the whole system, and it was shut. Cranked closed, orange with rust, stiff as a bolt that hadn't turned in years. The tower above it was dry. There was no pressure in that town, no source, nothing to push a single drop, and every dial behind me kept turning. That was when I heard it, under the quiet, not the meters, below them. A long, low draw of water moving through pipe, the sound a big line makes when something downstream is pulling hard. It came up through the ground and through my boots, and when I took a step back toward the truck, it moved with me, tracking under the street a beat behind my feet, the way a dog lifts its head and follows you across a room without getting up. I made the truck door with my hand shaking on the handle, and that was when I heard it stop. I called it in on the drive back, the way you're supposed to with a whole route of faults. The after-hours line rings to a dispatcher who logs it and pings the on-call tech. It rang a long time. Then someone picked up and didn't say the greeting they're supposed to say, just breathing on the line, and then a man's voice, older, easy, like he'd been waiting for the call. Ferris Hollow, he said. Not a question. He said it before I'd given him a single address. I told him I had 11 faults out there, the whole line reading through a shut valve. There was a pause and water in it somehow. That same low draw running down the line of the phone. And then he said, "They're not faults, son. They're confirmed. I'll take care of the paperwork." And he hung up. I pulled over onto the shoulder. I brought up my handheld to look at what I'd logged, and while I watched, the screen changed on its own. One by one, my 11 faults blinked and rewrote themselves. Not to zero, to real reads, the exact dials I'd watched turning, each one stamped now with a note that hadn't been there when I logged them. Flow confirmed. Somebody, somewhere, was correcting my work in real time. They were faster than I was. They were fixing my mistake before I'd even made it back to the highway. I keep coming back to that voice saying son, like he knew me, like I was already a name on a list he'd been keeping a long time. That night, I logged into the county's meter database from home, the big back-end one we're not really supposed to touch off the clock. I searched Ferris Hollow, and it was there, all 11 meters, active, reporting, with a clean history going back years. Small, steady monthly reads, the kind a lived-in house makes. Every entry signed with a tech ID I didn't recognize, month after month, further back than the database was supposed to hold. And every single one carried the same note in the margin. 2 words, flow confirmed. I sat with that a long time. Not usage, not consumption, flow. Like whoever wrote it hadn't been measuring what a house used. They'd been measuring which way the water went. And then I understood the thing that turned the whole week over. A meter counts water passing through it. That's all it does. It doesn't know or care which direction. Water into a house turns the dial. But water going the other way, back down the line, out of the house, turns that dial exactly the same. I had spent a week reading every dial as usage, counting up, and the whole time I'd had the direction backward. The water in Ferris Hollow wasn't rising out of the ground to feed those houses. It was going down. The dials were counting water pulled from the whole system, from the reservoir, down the county line, through 11 meters, under 3 empty streets, into the earth. That's why the lawns were soaked and the tower was dry, and the shut valve didn't matter. Whatever was under that town wasn't fed by the pipes. It was drinking through them. And Cedar Loop, 4,000 gallons through a capped main, 40 minutes from the hollow. I'd read it as water lost. It was never lost. It was taken. The thing under that bowl of land had reached up the line, past the reservoir, all the way to the Harmon's empty house. And it had started drinking there, too. It was reaching further. The meters weren't broken. The meters were the only thing in the whole county telling the truth. There was a reason for all of it. I just didn't like where the reason was going. There was one more thing I could pull that night, so I pulled it. The tech ID that had signed every Ferris Hollow red, month after month, going back years. Our system ties each ID to a person, a name, a hire date. I ran it. It came back to a reader named Cole Ferris. I read the name 3 times. Ferris. Same as the town. His file said he'd worked the western routes for 31 years and retired the spring before I was hired. There was a scanned card in his record, an old benefits form, and down at the bottom, someone in the office had written a note, the way you note these things. Passed the following winter. Services at the Methodist Church on Route 9. But the reads didn't stop the winter he passed. They kept coming. Clean. Monthly. Signed with Cole Ferris's ID. All the way up to last month. Flow confirmed. Flow confirmed. Flow confirmed. In a town named for him. Logged by a man who'd been in the ground for years. I told myself it was clerical. Old IDs get recycled. Reassigned. Left active by mistake. That happens. Then I thought about Dale, knowing the name before he read it, and the note in the margin, and a man reading meters for a town on no map, faithfully, every single month, long after he had any hands to lift a lid. And recycled ID didn't cover any of it. Somebody was still reading Ferris Hollow. I just didn't want to think about who or what they were confirming every month, or why the county let them keep doing it. I should have taken it to the county right then. Instead, I went back one more time because I needed to prove myself wrong so I could sleep. I brought a test valve, a little brass thing that screws onto a service port so you can drain a line and see what comes out. Still water in an abandoned line comes out cold and rusty and stale. That would be that. Air in the pipe. Case closed. I picked the house with the blue door. The dial was still turning, a week straight now. Thousands of gallons through a home with no one in it. I threaded the valve onto the port and cracked it open. The smell came before the water did. Not chlorine, not rust, not the flat mineral smell of a well. Something warmer than that, and closer, like the inside of a mouth, like breath held too long in a small room. Then the water came, and it came body warm, not cool the way water 40 feet down should be, warm as skin, and it kept coming, more than a drained line should give, welling up over my fingers, and it didn't stop when I closed the valve. It came up through the sealed glass of the dial, through a meter built by law to be watertight, seeping around the numbers and pooling in the pit, rising the slow way a tub fills, like something below was pushing it up to reach me. I pulled my hand back. My fingers came away slick and warm, and down in the pit, in the standing water, something shifted. A slow, heavy turn, the way a big thing rolls over in deep sleep. I told myself raccoon. Something denned up in the warm damp of the box. That's a real thing. Then, under the water, I heard it, breathing, slow, deep, long, even pulls that didn't match anything my size, and didn't match the panic of a cornered animal, and did match, exactly, the slow sweep of the dial as it counted up. That was when I stopped telling myself it was nothing. I aimed my phone light down into the pit. The water had risen almost to the rim, dark and moving, and for 1 second the light caught something under the surface. Pale, turning, far too deep for a pit that should have ended 2 feet down. It was there, and then the water closed over it, and it was gone. I did not see it long enough to say what it was. I have thanked God for that every day since. I set the lid back and I heard the water settle behind me. And I understood, walking to the truck on legs that didn't feel like mine, that I had cracked a valve and offered it a taste of my own hand, and it had come up to see what I was. I don't remember the drive home. I remember standing in my kitchen not opening my own water bill, because I knew now exactly what a meter can and can't do, and I was afraid of what mine might say. I told people, later, that a raccoon got in the pit. A raccoon is a thing they can hold. It's easier than the truth. For everyone, me included. I keep it in the story on purpose. I woke at 3:14 in the morning to the sound of my own kitchen. Not a tap running, a draw. That low pull of a big line moving somewhere under the floor. The same sound I'd heard under the streets of the hollow, coming now from under my own house. The tap was off. I went out to the curb in my bare feet and lifted my own meter lid with my hands because I didn't have my tool, and the dial was turning. Slow, steady, counting up. My valve was shut. I'd shut it that evening without quite letting myself think about why. I walked the street after that, bare feet on cold concrete, lifting lids I had no business lifting. The Petersons, 2 doors down, the rental on the corner. The dial was turning in every pit I opened, slow and even, all the way to the end of the block. The same patient count I'd watched in a town that isn't on any map. Somewhere under my own quiet street, water was moving with purpose, going somewhere, and not one of my neighbors knew their meter was keeping score. I set every lid back the way I found it. I didn't wake anybody. There's nothing to say that a person would believe, and I'd already learned what they do when you try. An animal can't do that. A bad seal can't do that. There is no version where the water in my own capped pipe moves at 3 in the morning, and my own meter counts it going down. It had read my house the way I'd read its town. It knew where I lived. And somewhere in a database, if anyone ever looked, there was a new line with my address on it, and 2 words in the margin. Flow confirmed. Monday I made the county come out. I didn't tell them about the breathing or the warm water or the thing that turned over in the dark. I told them Ferris Hollow was a live line losing unmetered water at a rate that would wreck their reservoir numbers. And that got them moving, because money always does. They cranked the reservoir gate down. They capped the county line at the turnoff, the real cap, the welded kind, upstream of the whole town. They pulled all 11 meters and left the pits open and empty in the grass. And it worked. That's the part nobody believes. The reeds went to 0. Cedar Loop went to 0. The whole thing went quiet. Dale filled out a form. The town got its checkbox. And I was told, kindly, that I'd been reading a dead system alone in the heat too long. They gave me 2 weeks off. They meant it as a kindness. I took it as one. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe there's a limestone shelf under that bowl of land, a real hollow the whole valley was named for, and the old well field cracked into it decades ago, and water finds its way down through rock the way it always has, and a warm spring fed the heat up the line, and a raccoon really did den in a pit, and a tired man alone in the sun read a string of coincidences as a hand coming up out of the ground. Sinkholes are real. Subsidence is real. Old mines flood and pull whole ponds down overnight, and nobody ever sees it happen. That's the version I tell people. It lets everyone sleep. It isn't what I believe. Because they capped the line upstream of the town. They took away the straw. But water still has to go somewhere. And whatever was drinking under Ferris Hollow didn't stop when we pulled its meters. It just lost the one thing that was counting. My own meter still turns some nights. 314 mostly. I've stopped shutting the valve because shutting it never mattered. I've stopped lifting the lid because I don't want to know how deep the water in my own pit goes now. I read meters for the County Water Authority. I know exactly what a turning dial means. Something downstream is pulling hard, and it's patient, and it has all the time in the world. I just can't tell anymore which way my water's going.